Welcome back to All This Math. This is Professor Parker, and on this lesson, we're going to talk about the number line. And not only are we going to talk about the number line, but we're also going to talk about how to plot points on the number line or how to find values on the number line. All right. Now, in order to do this, you got to know a little bit about fractions, not just like necessarily how to add or subtract fractions or whatever, but you got to know something conceptually about fractions. So here's our instructions. We're going to plot meaning we're going to find where the point is. We're going to find where that value is, and we're going to draw a point. That's what we mean when we say plot. Now, you could be plotting points on a number line, which will then enable you to plot points on a coordinate plane, which has an x-axis and a y-axis, where we draw lines and curves, and basically we draw pictures that represent a lot of the equations that you'll see in mathematics and in higher level mathematics, right? So we're going to plot 7/8. This fraction right here is 7/8. And I want you to read it like that. Say it like that. Some people say 7/8 or 7 out of 8. But in this context, we want to say 7/8 because your denominator is really a unit. It tells you how many pieces you have. So think of 7/8 like this, right? Let's say you have a pizza, right? That's an easy example to work with because most pizzas are typically cut into 8 slices, right? So you got a pizza that's cut into 8 equal slices. That's where the denominator 8 comes in. The denominator always tells you how many equal pieces you have, right? That's what the denominator does. The numerator or the top number tells you how many of those equal pieces you are focused on, or how many of those equal pieces that you actually care about. So that's why you got 7/8. So basically you're in a situation where the object, in this case the pizza, right, the round pizza or whatever, is broken down, or maybe you might be a down north pizza on Lehigh where they got the rectangular pizzas, right? Well, shout out to them. But anyway, you got 8 slices of pizza, right? And they're 8 equal pieces. So out of that, we dealing with 7 of those. That's what 7/8 really means. You got eighths, right? You got something that's cut into eighths, and then you focused on 7 of them. That's what your numerator means. And that's what the fraction 7/8 means. Now, if you slide over here, you look at this. This is called a mixed number. Why is it mixed? Because it's made up of 2 different types of numbers. Just like you might have a mixed juice, right? Apple cranberry juice or cranberry apple juice is a mixed juice because it's made up of cranberry juice and apple juice mixed together. 2 different types of juice, right? That make one juice. This is a mixed number because there's 2 different types of numbers. You got a whole number, 2, and a fraction. Whole number, fraction. You got a 2 and you got a 3/4. So with the 2, you know what that is. That's like 2 whole objects, right? Imagine 2 whole pizzas, right? That's what the 2 represents, 2 whole pizzas. And then this fraction is 3/4. So let's say it's 3/4 of a pizza. So let's say this pizza is not like this pizza because this pizza is cut into 4 slices, right? Cut into 4 slices. So you got 4 equal pieces. And out of those 4 equal pieces, you are focused on 3 of them. You focused on 3 of them, all right? So 3/4. That's how many fourths you got. You got 3/4. All right, now, where would these numbers be located on this number line? So first, let's look at 7/8. 7/8, right? 7/8 is more than 0. It's not negative, right? It's more than 0, but it's less than 1. Because anytime you have a fraction that's got an equal numerator and denominator, that fraction is equal to 1. So that means that 8/8 would be equal to 1. So if you got 7/8, that means you got less than 1. So that means that this fraction is in between 0 and 1. It's in between here. Now your job is to figure out where exactly it is. So dig this, right? Count these spaces. Count how many spaces it is. Now don't count lines. That's another thing. Don't count lines. Count spaces. You gotta count spaces. Don't count lines. Count spaces. Just like when you use a ruler. When you use a ruler, you don't count the lines. You count the spaces. All right? So you start here at 0. This is 1 space, 2 spaces, 3 spaces, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And look where I'm at. At this line, this is 1. This is the whole 1. So this is 8/8. So each of these is 8 spaces. Well, there's 8 spaces inside of here. So each of these is 1/8. Each of those spaces is 1/8 because it's 8 little spaces. So each of those little spaces is 1/8. So the thing we're dealing with is an eighth, right? Just like if we was dealing with money, talking about dollars. You might have $1, then $2, then $3, then $4. In this case, we dealing with eighths. We got 1/8, then 2/8, then 3/8, 4/8, and so on. So if you're trying to find 7/8, all you got to do is count from 0. So instead of counting by whole numbers, what we doing now is we counting by fractions. We counting by eighths. Sometimes you might be counting by halves. Sometimes you might be counting by thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, 15ths, 12ths. You could be counting by any fraction, right? We're not always counting by whole numbers. I know a lot of times in life, we only count by whole numbers, but sometimes you could count by fractions. So look, we got 1/8, and I'm looking for 7/8 now, right? So I got 1/8, then I got 2/8, then I got 3/8, then I got 4/8, then I got 5/8, then I got 6/8, then I got 7/8, and I stop right there. Now, that's another reason that I told you, I recommend to you, when you read a fraction, when you read it on paper, don't say 7/8. Say 7/8, because that's what you got. You got eighths. So that way you'll be able to understand better if you encounter a problem like this, because you already thinking of it as the way you say it out loud. You already thinking of it as how many eighths you got, right? How many of the denominator do you have? You got 7 of them. You dealing with eighths, but how many do you have? You got 7 of them. So that's 7/8. Just like if you had $7. The denominator is really just a unit, right? It represents like what unit you are dealing with in this case. So 7/8 is after this space. So what you do is, that's where 7/8 is, right? 7/8 represents the space between 0 and this line right here. Because between this line and this line right here is 7/8. So you're going to draw a point right there. So I just plotted the point. I just plotted 7/8 right there. So that's what you got to do to plot a fraction, right? You look at the denominator, you say, okay, well, what denominator is it? What denomination am I working with? I'm working with eighths. So I got to count and see, and it just so happens that this number line is broken up into whole numbers, but then the whole numbers are broken down into eighths. So all I got to do is count 7/8. Now, the mixed number is a little different. It requires a little more work, a little more thought. We got 2 3/4, right? So we got 2 3/4, right? So we got to go to 2. We got to count. We go from 0 to 1 to 2. 2 3/4. That's less than 3, because this is a proper fraction. This is not 4/4. It's less than 4/4. It's only 3/4. If it was 4/4, it would be a whole 1. And you probably wouldn't see that anyway, because 4/4 is equal to 1. So that would just be really be 2 plus 1 in real life, which is 3. And that would be a whole number. So it would just be written as a 3. But because it's 2 3/4, that means that this is between 2 and 3. It's greater than 2, but it's less than 3. It's 2 3/4. Now your job is to figure out where is 3/4 at between 2 and 3. Now, I already told you that in this number line, the spaces between the whole numbers are broken down into eighths, right? It's 8 equal spaces, right? They're broken down into eighths. But the difference is your denominator is not an 8. So you might be looking at this like, well, what am I supposed to do now? My denominator is not an 8, like in this one. It's okay. I gotta wait for you to figure that out. Look what I wrote right here. If you got 8 spaces, right, and you trying to basically break this space down into fourths. Now you're trying to break it down into quarters, right? Quarters and fourths mean the same thing. Quarters and fourths, quarters and fourths. Just like 25 cents is a quarter. 25 cents is also 1/4 of a dollar. See, all the terminology, all these things are equal to each other. They're all synonymous. Quarters, fourths, a fourth of a dollar, they all mean the same thing. They represent value. They represent a fraction. They represent the same type of fraction. All right. So this is broken down into eighths, but I need to get into fourths. So this is what you do. You got 8 spaces, right? You divide that by your denominator. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to break these 8 spaces down into 4 equal spaces. You're trying to break these 8 spaces down into 4 equal spaces. So the way you do that is you do division. You do 8 divided by 4. And 8 divided by 4 is 2, which means this. Every 2 spaces is a fourth. Every 2 spaces is a fourth. That's what that means. So you take these 8 spaces, divide them up by 4, divide them into 4 equal parts, because that's what this is. This denominator is a 4. So this is dealing with fourths or quarters. Fourths and quarters are the same thing, again. So you take these 8 spaces, divide them up into 4 equal parts. Each of those parts is 2 spaces. Each of those parts is 2 spaces. So watch this, right? Watch what I do. This is, so I go 1, 2. That's 1/4. I go 1, 2 again. That's 2/4, which is the same thing as a half. 2/4 is the same thing as a half, because 2 out of 4 is a half. Back to the pizza analogy or the pizza example. If you got a small pizza with 4 slices, if you eat 2 of those slices, you just ate half of the pizza. So 2 out of 4 is the same thing as 1 out of 2. Or 2/4 is the same thing as 1/2. I count another 2 spaces. 1, 2, that's 3/4. And then 1, 2 again. Now I'm at the next whole number, which is 3, which will also be 4/4. That would be 4/4, right? I already told you 4/4. Anytime you got a fraction where your numerator is the same as your denominator, the top number the same as the bottom number, that fraction is equal to 1. That whole fraction is equal to a 1. So that's why if we get the 4/4, we got 1, and we would have 2 plus 1, which is 3 anyway. So this is 4/4, right? Now, look what we did. Every 2 spaces is 1/4 or is a quarter, right? So now we can plot 2 and 3/4. So we go to 2, then we count 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and I already labeled it, right? So all you got to do is do this. 2 and 3/4 is right there. But understand how you do it. Understand how you do it. See, math not hard. Just a lot of times people never get taught how to do stuff, right? And a lot of times you've been in schools and in different programs where people just expect you to figure stuff out. And it shouldn't really even be like that for real, right? So I'm telling you how to do it. Like I'm putting you onto the game. Like this is how you do it. When you got a fraction like this, so the spaces in between 2 and 3 are broken down into eighths, right? Your denominator is a 4 though. So you want to figure out where the fourths is at. You want to change the eighths into fourths. So what you do is you take the 8 spaces and you divide it by the denominator. Take the number of spaces, divide it by the denominator. Take the number of spaces, divide it by the denominator. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So that means that every 2 spaces is 1/4. And 1/4, we call that our unit fraction. Call it our unit fraction because our numerator is a 1. So every 2 spaces is a 4th. And just like, that's why I got it labeled like this. 1/4, then 2/4, then 3/4, then 4/4. All right. So then I already got 3/4 labeled right there. So that means that 2 and 3/4 is start at 2, go 2 and 1/4, 2 and 2/4, 2 and 3/4. That's that right there. And this is how you do it. Right now, I gave another example. So this is the original problem. We had to plot 7/8 and 2 and 3/4. Now, what if I wanted to plot 1 and 1/2? I want to find out where 1 and 1/2 is. All right. Now, 1 and 1/2, I know that that's more than 1, but it's less than 2. Because think about it. 1 and 1/2 is the same thing as $1.50. Half is less than the next whole number, right? Half of $1 is 50 cents. So 1 and 1/2 is the same thing as $1.50. That's more than $1, but it's less than $2. It's halfway between $1 and $2, right? So we got 1 and 1/2, and we want to know where that's at. Now, we can use the same method that I put up here, right here, for 1 and 1/2, because the space, excuse me, the space in between 1 and 2, it's got 8 spaces. It's broken down into 8 spaces. But I want a half of it. I want to know the halfway mark. So what I do is, I do the same thing. 8 spaces divided by 2. So I'm going to do 8 spaces divided by 2. And 8 divided by 2 is equal to 4. So I put my 4. So that means that 1/2 is 4 spaces. 1/2 is 4 spaces. So check this out. So I go from 1 and I count 1 space, 2 spaces, 3 spaces, 4 spaces. This is the 4th space. So this is 1/2 right here. That's 1/2 right there. All right. That's 1/2 right there. And then the other half is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 again. And look where we at. That would be 2 halves. which is the next whole number, because 2 halves is equal to a whole 1. 2 halves is equal to a whole 1. We can like simplify that and just call it a whole number 1. So look, but if we're looking for 1 1/2, 1 1/2 is right here. And that's how you do it. You know, that's how you do it. So if the fraction is in eighths, the spaces in between the numbers is already broken down into eighths, so you just got to count using the numerator how many eighths that is. If you're trying to find 2 3/4, you count them by fourths, right? But you need to figure out how many spaces is equal to a quarter or equal to a fourth. How many spaces is equal to a fourth? You got to figure that out, right? So that's what you got right here. This point right here is the 3/4. And then halves, how many spaces is equal to a half? By doing the math. 8 divided by 2, which is 4. So 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where a half is. All right? And that's how you do it. But you got to practice this. If you don't really understand this, you got to practice it. You know what I'm saying? You got to practice it, because if you don't practice it, then, I mean, it might make a little sense right now, right away. You might do your assignment or whatever, but you're going to forget it. And by the time the test come around, you're not going to know it. But it's just a good skill to have anyway. But you got to practice. So go get some practice on problems like this. Plot some fractions. You know, make up some of your own fractions. Draw some number lines on paper. You know, do whatever you need to do. Print some out from the internet, wherever. And go do your thing. Rock out. All right? I'll see you in the next video. Peace.